Well, welcome back to Pastors on Porn. And before we get into our topic today on Route 666, once again, I want to invite you to connect with me, especially if you're a pastor who is struggling with your private sex life. Sometimes, as pastors in our struggles, we need a safe place to turn to. And sometimes it's a very first step towards regaining a sense of health or wholeness, or talking to somebody about how we found ourselves in a situation. We never planned to be there, but all of a sudden we find ourselves in a difficult situation. We're going, oh my goodness, I am getting in situations here that are not where I wanted to be. And who do I talk to, and how do I begin to get out of this? So I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at bandofbrothers.care. And actually, it's bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. And I work specifically with people who are pastoring or in leadership roles, or sometimes nonprofits or ministry situations. But they're also finding some of the things in life have started to weigh them down. They find themselves going to places on the internet they don't want to be, and now they feel like, this is a habit that I can't break. So I'd love to hear from you. And if you go back to one of the very first episodes, I introduced the website, which is bandofbrothers.care. And if you go under the Pastors tab there, you will see a video where I describe a bit of my struggles as a pastor, and also why I think that in some ways being a pastor uniquely sets us up for some of these struggles. So I do get it. I understand. And I think you'll find in me a listening ear, and maybe some ideas around how you can take the first step towards wholeness. So anyways, I'd love to hear from you if you're in that situation. So today we are continuing a series around signposts that we've called Route 666. And this is route markers that often accompany a journey that ends in a car wreck. The route towards where bad things end up happening. And to review, I've looked at 3 of those common route markers. It's based on Stephen Mansfield's book about 10 signs of a leadership crash. I'm actually working with Stephen. Hopefully he can come on and I can have a conversation with him. But the idea, 3 of the ones that we looked at, the first one we looked at the route marker of growing isolation. From there, we looked at the whole area of beginning or losing close friendships, or perhaps finding ourselves in a situation where we don't have close friendships, and the dangers that brings about in our lives. And then thirdly is the route marker between the growing gap, or mind the gap between our public persona and our private reality. So those were 3 of the route markers we've looked at so far. And today, I want to look at a route marker that you might not have connected with coming trouble. And here it is: forgetting fun. It sounds simple, doesn't it? It almost sounds trite. You're going, well, I don't see how that is connected with growing or coming trouble. But let me just say, this whole idea of fun, or self-care, which is probably the broader area of this area, is I think most of us, at least I can speak for myself, I find that there's at least 3 things in my life that have sort of conspired against me when I have sought to prioritize things like having fun or in my life. Here's the first one. My childhood messages don't allow it or don't make room for it. Now, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I have a problem. Ever since I was a child, I found that whenever I relax, I feel guilty. Now, I grew up on a farm, and there was only one way to prove your worth, and that was to be a hard worker. Now, I know when I was young, I never worked as hard as my brothers and sisters. I come from a family of incredibly hard workers. And that was pointed out to me when I was 4, by my dad, who pointed out that I was not as good as rock picker as my older brothers and sisters. Now, you can make light of it, but that was the way you proved your worth, by being a hard worker. One of the biggest fears I have for my life is that I'm lazy. So I drive myself to prove that I am not lazy, to prove to other people that I'm not lazy. I even take and apply that to my spiritual life. Hard work equals being spiritual. And so I often measure my spiritual bona fides on a work scale, proving to myself that I am a hard worker, proving to myself that I am spiritual. I mean, I should be, right? I'm a pastor. Now, I am a blessed man in this struggle for this reason. I happen to be married to a woman who thinks that I am nuts in this area. She is constantly telling me that I have a problem in this area. She says, "What is the deal with you? Why do you drive yourself like this?" I mean, I can't imagine what things would be like if I had married a real driver, somebody who only accentuated or could play on that thing, that fear of me being lazy. I would have cracked a long time ago. She says to me, "I just don't get it. Why do you drive yourself like this?" All I'm saying is that for me, fun doesn't come easy. Relaxing doesn't come easy. It's suspect. It's even slothful. At the very best, it's an optional thing that I can maybe get to when I've done everything that needs to be done. I've met with everybody that wants to meet with me, when I've earned the right to have fun. Now you might say, "Vern, you are uniquely messed up." But I just want to say, for the very first thing, I recognize that I have an internal hesitation in this area that I've always struggled with. Now, what also doesn't hurt is I think sometimes there are cultural norms or church cultures where prioritizing self-care, things like fun, also don't help us. Let me tell you, this is a true story that I heard from a pastor about his church experience with a previous church. Now, this pastor loved to golf, but he began to hear from the people in the church about how he seemed to have much more time for golfing than he did for them. Simply put, people said about him, he golfs too much. Now, this guy was very conscientious, and trying to be a good pastor, he ended up selling his golf clubs. He doubled down on his desire to be a good servant of God and a servant of his parishioners. True story. For the next 2 years, he continued to hear from his people a common complaint. Guess what it was? He golfed too much. That was a dysfunctional church culture. At some point, he ended up leaving that church, and the welcome gift his new church got him was, you got it, a set of golf clubs. Now, I would say the culture in that new church was different than his previous church. In his old church, golfing was associated with frivolity, the kind of focus that didn't fit with their view of a pastor or what a man of God should be like. Now, that might seem like a bit of an extreme story, and you might say, well, that feels really dated. I think we've come a long way. That feels like something out of the 50s or 60s or even 70s. But I am becoming very much aware that there are different church cultures, and there's different cultural components of what people expect of themselves and expect of their pastors. Now, I might be walking on thin ice here, but let me speak a bit of my experience in this regard, and maybe you can relate. See, I live in a town, and I've pastored in a town the last 25 years, where the churches are largely populated by Dutch and Mennonite people. Now, let's take the Mennonites, for example. They are wonderful, generous, hard-working people, servant-hearted people. They arrived in North America a few generations ago with next to nothing, and they've made a life and a future for themselves and their children through, you got it, hard work. And I have been blessed to pastor and have many of them as friends over the years. Wonderful people. But I've also noticed a component of their culture that I don't think is so good. There is a strain of criticalness and perfectionism that they attach to looking good and working hard. And I've certainly noticed in being a pastor in those settings is when the pastor does not measure up to their discerning palate, they let them know and point out to them, in love, mind you, about how they can work harder and do better. Now, I think that's as much cultural as anything else. All I'm saying is it's not an easy culture to pastor in and take self-care around things like fun seriously. Once again, my wife doesn't have this problem. She wasn't raised Protestant. She was raised Catholic, and I'm not saying this is all Catholics are like this. You know, she very much a part of our stream right now, but she just thinks the Protestant work ethic, she says, is nuts. She freely tells me it's nuts. Now, don't get me wrong. She's a hard worker. She's just not a hard worker that needs to prove her worth to God and other people. You know, prove that by her hard work. Like I say, I'm a blessed man. All I'm saying is I think culture and background can play a part in our hesitation to prioritize something like fun and self-care. So that's a second reason. First reason is maybe your internal messages, and the second reason is maybe the messages you get either directly or indirectly that you hear in the church. Here's a third thing that I think conspires against us in this area, and here's where we just want to get practical. Sometimes the demands of life just make it hard to prioritize this. For example, maybe you have a young family. You know, you come home from work and your kids come running to you and your exhausted wife looks at you like, I need to get out of here. That's what my wife would do when her kids were young. She would just say, give me the credit card. I'm out of here. And, and then she would go off and sit in a coffee shop and blow all of $5 on an expensive coffee. Like I say, I'm a blessed man, but just think about how difficult it is in that season of your life to try to take care of those own personal needs that you have. It's like life is conspiring against you. Or here's another one. You know, money's tight. Being a pastor is not a lucrative profession in most circles. The last thing you feel like you can afford to do is take money out of the budget. You think, you know what a round of 18 holes of golf costs? Do you know what buying that table saw would cost, or that mountain bike or dirt bike? And you go, we just can't afford it. I can't justify this. And once again, life has conspired against you. So for those reasons, it's easy to back away from this whole area. So then what is the end result? Why do people like Mansfield or other studies say that forgetting fun is hazardous to your health and is often linked with an eventual crash? Well, this is the way that Mansfield puts it. He says, having things like fun and hobbies and pursuits that make you come alive, they act as a sort of pressure valve in your life. And they keep the inner pressure from getting too great. You see, when Jack is all work and no play, eventually Jack decides he needs to let some steam off, and things begin to go awry because he lets steam off in non-helpful ways. If we don't regularly let the pressure off, we'll find the wildness or the adventure or the escape in buying something really big that is too expensive, or doing something really big and really dumb like having an affair, or starting a secret life online, or developing a fantasy life where we're fantasizing about a life very different than the one we're in, which eventually leads us to take some steps in that direction. If you go back to one of my earliest episodes, I spoke about different seasons of life that are often associated with different sort of setups towards sexual struggles. And I spoke about, for example, the young man with a growing family who ends up just by the weight of responsibilities feeling trapped. And he acts out sexually just because it's an escape from responsibilities and demands. It's a way that he feels alive. So that's an example of a situation where you see that pressure getting let off in an unhelpful way. Here's another example from that whole series I did on life stages. I'm very observant with guys who hit midlife, and I always call midlife somewhere between the 38 to 43 range. And I've just found in being with guys and talking to guys that a number of things begin to converge in a man's life around that age. You know, sometimes they've spent the last 10 to 15 years establishing their career, their nose to the grindstone, focusing on the kids. Now the kids are growing up, maybe obnoxious teenagers. The marriage is feeling stale, and they look at the results of their efforts, the work of their hands, and they go, man, this has not got me to where I want to be. And as a result, they end up making some really big and really foolish decisions in that headspace. Now, I'm not saying that this will keep you from having a midlife crisis, for example, but it will take the pressure off. I had a midlife crisis, but the reality is it didn't take me to such extreme scenarios because I had learned to prioritize some self-care in different areas. When our life has no room for fun, it's like we never change the oil in the car. Eventually, at some point, the viscosity breaks down, the engine overheats, and eventually everything seizes up. One of my favorite movies of all time is the movie Fight Club. It's a bunch of guys who are asking big questions about life and not liking what they see in their own lives. And yes, they're doing some pretty stupid things as a result. You know, when I left teaching and took up as a pastor, which I did for the next 30 years, I jokingly called it my anti-midlife crisis step because I felt like I needed to really double down on what I felt would give me a renewed sense of purpose and calling in my life. And it really did do that. But I felt like, looking back, that I did not prioritize this as I should have. Again, I think I was doing enough of it, but I still think, and I find myself now in talking to guys, that I'm now at a point where I need to ask myself again, what does self-care look like? What does fun look like for you? I mean, you don't have to be your typical wild at heart guy that goes to hunt a rhino with a Bowie knife or something. Maybe that's not your thing, or go out in the woods and beat your chest. That might not be your thing. Maybe it's just getting back into fishing, or maybe it's joining a slow pitch league or a cigar club, or, buying a car that you had or always wanted to have that needs to be restored, and you can now mess around with your wife in the back seat. I don't know. The point is what is it that you can do? How do you know if it qualifies? Well, I'll tell you something that doesn't qualify. If you have to put something on your to-do list, that doesn't count. The things I'm talking about are the things that you get to do when all of your things on your to-do list are done. And because some of you never have all of your to-do list things done, it's the thing you get to do that you would never put on your to-do list. So if it's a to-do list thing, it doesn't count. Second qualification that I would say is, what is it that when you do this thing, you have fun in this way, you go and participate in that hobby, and here it is, you lose track of time. You got to stop before you want to stop, and something you can't wait to get back to. If you're losing track of time, those kind of things, then that qualifies. You go, well, I don't know what would qualify then. Well, let me just say this. One of the sad truths is for those of us who developed a rich porn life or a fantasy life or whatever that was, is it was porn that acted as that exciting diversion or escape or adventure. And now we find ourselves with a big hole in our lives. And as that old verse says, when you clean out a house and you don't replace it, it's likely that things worse are going to come back and take its previous role. It's not surprised that therapists who work with men with sexual struggles or addictions, one of the main things that they do as part of their healing journey is they get them to focus on re-engaging with life-giving, healthy passions to replace old destructive ones. So let me just end with saying this. On the root way of life, for your good, I encourage you to get a life. Get a fun life. Get something that you can lose track of time. Something that can get your adrenaline going, or something that can get your eyes light up doing, or your passions are re-energized. So till next time, it's been great talking to you, and I'd love to hear from you. God bless.